Well, all right, kiddos, it's time to sharpen up those edges and grease up your chains. We are going to live it up with mountain life. Dropping in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How's it going, mountain lifers? Welcome to Live It Up with Mountain Life. Thanks for listening. You're not here to listen to me navel gaze or wax poetic about spring in Ontario, nor tell you about the accidental swim I took down some rapids yesterday. You're here because you want to learn more about Scott Parent. Me too. So let's get to it. But first, here's a word from our partner. For almost 40 years, the Jack Wolfskin name and paw print have been a symbol of their trailblazing spirit and regard for nature. Since 1981, they have led the pack with innovative, eco-conscious technologies, a commitment to social responsibility, and forward-thinking designs. If you haven't seen the Jack Wolfskin paw print before, it's because they have only just completed their newest den here in North America. Jack Wolfskin will see you in the wild, wherever that is for you. The first time I heard the name Scott Parent, he was pitching a story about his SUP crossing of Georgian Bay. I was editor of Mountain Life Blue Mountains at the time. He was humble about his accomplishment, but it was a big one. Few people were doing SUP crossings back then, so to paddle from Lion's Head to Perry Sound was a massive move. It took him about 18 hours from the time he stepped off land to the time he stepped on land again. An incredible feat. When describing Scott Parent, I often claim he's not a normal human being, because he isn't. He's tougher than most. He's ready to suffer more. He'll manage discomfort longer. He'll work harder and sleep less. For starters, he lives in a house that he built with his wife. There are no nails in the structure, and it was all built barefoot, using ropes and pulleys to erect the massive beam structure. They've got running water, but no flushing toilet. He lives like this with 3 kids. So his everyday life is an adventure. 4 years after that first crossing, Scott and fellow adventurer Zane Davies walked across a frozen Georgian Bay in the winter of 2015. They dragged paddleboards and sledges, using them to cross any open water during their journey. It took 2 days. It was another epic mission, and Georgian Bay hasn't frozen so thoroughly since. In those years since first receiving an email from him, Scott and I have become great friends. We've paddled canoes and paddleboards. We've nearly dumped in multiple rivers and had some serious laughs. And my trips with him are always easy, because I know if it all goes sideways, Scott's level head will save me. That's just the kind of guy he is. To put a label on him is difficult. He's a wilderness guide, a photographer, a writer, and a filmmaker. And he's one of Georgian Bay's fiercest advocates. Enough of my praise for one of my favorite human beings. Here's my conversation with Scott Parent. Welcome to Live It Up with Mountain Life. Scott Parent, thanks for joining, buddy.
Well, happy to be here, man. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. So how's it going?
It's going good.
Yeah.
How are you, Colin?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah. Did a little swimming in a river last night accidentally.
Yeah, all part of the learning curve.
Yeah, totally. Cool. So, I first heard your name. I think you sent me an email and you were pitching a story about your crossing of Georgian Bay on a stand-up paddleboard. That's a pretty major mission. How was that crossing? Can you tell me about it?
Yeah, man. So, and that was actually, it would have been 2012 because the crossing happened in 2011. But Colin, let me just first say too that story was also when I first heard of Colin Field, and just wanted to say, since then, we've shared heaps of adventures, up on the peninsula, and we've ran multiple rivers with our kids and had a blast with the photo safari, and and we've rode tandem, a little tipsy on a tall bike and all that, and I just want to say, you've taught me a lot, and ultimately you helped shape my shooting a great deal in those early days, and teaching me the rule of thirds and reminding me when to take the lens cap off. But
cheers,
yeah,
buddy.
it all goes back to, I guess, that that email and pitching that story to Mountain Life, and
yeah,
we've done a lot of co-collaboration since then. So
for sure.
But yeah, August 1st, 2011, I completed the first solo unassisted crossing of Georgian Bay on a layered 14-foot Coast Runner sup. And
Yeah.
yeah, man. So, and it wasn't to be the first or anything like that. That wasn't the goal or the objective. It was mostly just this, I just had a huge desire to see, if I could pull it off and to make the crossing. And really what I wanted to try to do was to reckon the island, the Western Islands. There's a small island cluster. They've got to be one of the most remote islands on Georgian Bay, but certainly from the far side, like coming from the peninsula, they were about 77 kilometers off the horizon. So
Okay. So,
the objective was kind of like it was inspired by a Polynesian style wayfaring type mission. Like I really wanted to see if I could pull it off using wind, waves, and stars to like navigate and see if I could actually align myself in the right position and see the find the islands basically and raise what they call raise the turtle, like emerge the island off the horizon.
okay.
And
Yeah.
I also figured I'd have the lighthouse to go by as I got closer. Nighttime would hit and I'd see the lighthouse and
So you
be able to
start,
kind of,
you,
what's that?
you started early morning and then you went right into the night.
Started early morning. I remember that morning very vividly because I was just on the outskirts of a thunder system that had passed through, so I could still see this big lightning show on the horizon. And it's kind of like, what do I do? I'm like, should I be doing this? I paddled out to Gun Point in Lion's Head Provincial Park and just kind of had a big moment to myself, just watching the days begin and everything was in alignment and that system was clearing out, kind of like emptying the arena, and the winds were strong, which is what I wanted. So, because I wanted to, downwind the crossing and yeah, man. So
Cool.
then I built it up and went for it. So
how far is that like from land to land? Is it 77 kilometers? That's what you said?
77 kilometers from my departure point at Lion's Head to the Western Islands. They might be slightly less than that, but my line, especially just navigating with observations, I was tacking all over the place. And so my line might have been a bit more extended than the actual distance, but that's what the spot had read. And then to complete the full crossing, I basically spent, a few hours of the night on the Western Islands. And then the next day finished up in Sans Souci across the bay, which my total distance was 100 kilometers.
Okay. Wow. And like for people who don't understand, or Georgian Bay can sound, I mean, it can get pretty gnarly out there. If you didn't pick your weather right, you would have been in some trouble.
Absolutely. And I think even when you pick your weather right, it's it changes so quickly out there. That actually happened to me on the crossing. I think I pulled off the majority of that distance in a really good time considering what I was trying to do. But then that last 11 kilometers, I labored so hard because of a subtle change in the wind direction. So then it was no longer surfing and it coming up from behind me. It was hitting me broadside and I had to labor a little hard to get to the island. Plus it was nighttime and
right.
And and also I remember one thing where my plan did not go the way I wanted it to was here I assumed I'd have this this beacon to kind of easily target and sight and paddle into, but when you hit the east shore or the east archipelago of Georgian Bay, there are so many nautical lights blinking. So it's that was one challenge. And then on top of that, because of the wave height, I was coming in on about 1.5 meters swell. And so essentially the lighthouse beacon on the Western's double top island only beacons once every 10 seconds. And so often I would be in the trough of a wave set when that beacon would go off. So I would go, big periods of time where I had no real sense of my direction. But that was it was really cool because it actually forced me then to lean on my initial intention of navigating with the winds and the waves and the stars. And at that point, I had successfully, been utilizing to the best of my ability the wind and the waves. But using the lighthouse was a bit of a cop out for leaning up and depending on the stars. So once I had this real, situation where, my strategy of depending on the lighthouse beacon isn't working, I'm kind of, in a bit of, for lack of a better word, trouble. I just, was able to then time it when the beacon went off and I saw an immediate star above the beacon. Well, then that star became my guiding light. And
Right.
that was the strategy that I used to get in safely, and it worked.
Wow, cool. What kind of what I think I remember you telling me you had a seatbelt or something that you could strap yourself to your board to if you had to. Is that am I
I had
remembering that right?
Yeah, I had a tether anyway, so it wasn't a seatbelt, but like I was definitely like, yeah, no, I had everything secure. I definitely everything's tied down, and then as it got darker, I would even tie my paddle off and things like that. Like just everything would be secured in case you drop things. And it happened. Like I capsized or I fell off, I guess, about 2 or 3 times.
Hmm.
Yeah, as I got closer. And just for, it's also just as it got dark, just for safety, I also donned a wetsuit. It became more of an inconvenience than anything because it was pretty hot. This was August. But again, out Georgian Bay, just not knowing you could get out in certain areas, colder currents, you could hit a pocket of cold water. So I did put a wetsuit on, which kind of became a pain in the butt. But
yeah, right. What other gear do you take with you on a mission like that?
so I had so essentially all your standard safety gear. So life jacket, again wetsuit. I had and a leash for sure. Always be leashed to the board. That's critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, securing everything down. I had enough gear to be gone for a 5-day trip. So because the crossing, in a sense, too, that there was all these other logistics that came up with it. Like, what do I do when I get to the other side?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, it was part of what I decided to do is just keep on paddling, and that was one of the strategies that I used to kind of get past sort of the daunting impression of the objective. It's like, okay, I knew I put the time in, I trained for it. I felt, respectfully confident because I did the work to prepare for that. But also to get past it, I kind of just started tacking on, a few extra days. Like, my family, they stem on my mom's side, stem from the Georgian Bay Métis community. And I knew that, she had been raised on an island somewhere over there. So the next day I figured, well, I'll tack that on. I'm going to go try to find that island just by paddling to it and then work my way into the Nottawasaga. And that kind of just gave me more focus and like kind of derail my focus from the daunting objective of the crossing. Just kind of make it one leg of the table rather than the whole thing. And
Right.
that really helped. And then but yeah, otherwise safety equipment. I had a good friend of mine, Misha Call. He engineered like nautical lights for the front of the board
Huh.
in case I ran into boats or something at nighttime. And he put so much craftsmanship into that thing. I was super proud to have it. But then when I came into the Western Islands that night, just the size of the waves and the arrival wasn't very clean,
Yeah.
and things just crashed. And unfortunately, that piece of gear broke.
Right.
But it was definitely good to have for the crossing.
Did you find the island where your mom grew up?
Yeah. So, but see, this is awesome. Like, not without some help. So, day 2, I ended up getting, so I paddle from the Westerns to Sans Souci, arrive at Henry's, all you can eat fish and chips,
Yeah.
had a massive feast. Yeah, man.
Awesome.
And then from there, and so that's where that whole area is where my family history has been around for some time. So as a kid, I was over there quite a bit and spent my summers there. But then, so day 3, there was a big east wind, and that kind of pinned me. So I was at the Sans Souci Marina, and I couldn't really go anywhere. And the power was out, so I couldn't even pay for groceries or anything. So I was just waiting. And I'm looking at the charts. There's a big chart on the wall there at the marina, and I'm trying to kind of imagine the area. Like I knew the island coming from the mouth of 12 Mile, but I've never attacked it from this side before paddling.
Mm-hmm.
So as I'm reviewing the charts, and also our family has a name for the island, but it's not its charted name, so we call it Manitou.
Okay.
And as I'm standing there, there's these 2 young kids, and they're kind of looking at me like a bit of an astronaut because I come in on this board and from the wet side, and
Mm-hmm.
so then they're just kind of standing around, and And so I just happened to ask them, I say, like, I'm looking for an island, we call it Manitou. Would you happen to know where it is? And the young girl said, well, my grandfather lives on Manitou. I know exactly where it is. So it's like, well, that's fascinating because that's my family's, historical homestead. And
Wow.
so who's your grandpa? And she tells me, and it ended up being the nephew of my grandfather. And so her and I are these distant cousins.
Wow.
And these are the kinds of things that happen to me when I'm able to, when I go out on the Georgian Bay, like things that I just don't expect. And so these two young cousins of mine, Courtney and Cody, basically they wanted to help me so bad that, they guided me to the island. Like they got in their little whaler and just kind of boated along, and while I paddled beside them, and they guided me to the island, which is so cool.
Amazing.
So yeah, found the island, spent the night there. There's an American family that owns it now and live there, and it's a wonderful hospitality. And it was just so great to explore that place, and and have that a part of that journey, like to connect it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
then carried on to like basically over to the Western Island, sorry, to the Pine Islands, and then to the Giant's Tomb, and then into the Nottawasaga.
Yeah, cool. And so I know you've always been into paddling, right? Were you into canoes for a long time?
Paddling, yeah, but it all comes back to the water for me. So I
Yeah.
think just growing up, it was like swimming, free diving, surfing, paddling, even fishing, but like just basically in being in and around the water. But yeah, as far as paddling, especially career wise, canoeing has been a big part of it. So like I used to, guide river trips in the Rockies, and then with school groups, I support a lot of canoe trips to Algonquin and Killarney. And then I love like whitewater river paddling, as you know very well.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
yeah, like there's nothing replaces canoeing. And like sup, I think for me, like is just kind of I don't know, it's a different thing, but it also, it's kind of like I love to surf as well. So that's where that kind of came together. It's
Right.
it's like paddling and surfing combined.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't replace canoeing.
Right. Cool. Okay, so then your next big adventure is I mean that was a huge accomplishment. People canoe across that once in a while, eh? Across Georgian Bay? Canoe or kayak?
There was a group that I had read an account of that had sea kayaked across it. I think they were a group of six.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I've never heard of anyone canoeing it.
Right. Yeah.
And I'd kind of be, yeah, that'd be a little nerve wracking. I mean, unless you have flotation or something. Like, so kind of back to the sup point, though, it's like part of why sup, for me is attractive is because of those open water objectives that I find attractive. So and anytime you're on the open water, I guess the analogy I use is cork over cup. So any cork style vessel is like for when you're considering open water objectives, it makes sense to take a vessel that just cannot capsize. Even in a sea kayak, and unless you're really well versed in performing roles, in meaty conditions, practicing your roles in a pool or in flat water don't really prepare you for, the big open water.
Yep.
And so that's where sup, and then also sup, we're not always looking for flat water conditions. Sometimes it's nice to have a swell on the open water, because that's when we rely on the surf element of navigation, and or using surf as a method of navigation, not just catching waves at the break, but using it out on big rolling swell. Wherein,
Right.
if you were in a canoe, you definitely want, flatter, calmer waters, because you're trying to protect yourself from flipping over.
Right. I like it. Cork versus cup. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Cool. So then in 2015, you walked across Georgian Bay in the winter. I mean, you're certainly the first and only person to do it in recorded history. I think that's fair to say. Can you tell me about that trip? How'd you make that happen?
Well, not without some serious help, and my buddy Zane Davies, who's also an accomplished ice water rescue tech and a guide. He's a sea kayak guide as well. But yeah, so that was a big one, like for sure. And I still consider it a paddle more than a trek. Even though we probably walked, I don't know, what it boils down to, but probably 88% of it or whatever. The entire objective could never have been accomplished without the element of paddling. And we had to paddle about 1.5 kilometers just to access the flows. And then in the middle of the journey, we had to paddle even more. But we used our SUPs like in a dynamic way, not just for paddling the open water, but we used them as hauling sleds on the ice while we were trekking. And then we used them as insulated sleeping pads. And then there's a couple of instances where we used them as like a board bridge, just where there'd be a bleed in the ice that it was just too far of a gap for us to hop. So we would use the board as a bridge. And it was just phenomenal how it all worked out. But I think when I reflect back on the winter crossing, I know very well, like I would have never even conceived it if not for the chapter of my life that I spent out in the Canadian Rockies. So like, I'd spent 10 years in the mountains climbing and, ice climbing and just playing on glaciers and things. And I think that's where it's like bringing a lot of that knowledge home to the lakes. It was just able to like see these systems. And so we relied a lot on glacial travel systems to pull it off. And Zane and I would spend, quite a bit of time in advance of the crossing preparing and just like working through systems and getting in the water, getting in the thick of it, imagining worst case scenarios, trying to prove to ourselves that it's just not possible. But in our approach, we'd always find the way. And the thing, I guess, inside of myself that I just knew was like, in that this was like a kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to try. And that in itself, I just really wanted to commit to. In 2014, like we had a phenomenal freeze up, and that in and of itself is rare. Might happen, once every 20 years or something. But then to see it happen again in 2015 was like, okay, so I had all of this previous year to prepare. I'd spent a lot of time out on the Fathom 5, working through systems, hiking out to the flower pots, and just playing on the ice. And then so just having all of that recent experience in 2014 was just fuel for the fire to really take a good stab at it in 2015. And
Right.
knowing how critical and important the ice pack is to the overall balance of the lake systems and to native fish species and stuff like that, I kind of wanted to do an objective that was like a marker in the sand historically, something that we would all remember looking back. Because honestly, since 2015 and since Zane and I walked off the ice at 12 Mile after that journey, there hasn't been an opportunity since. The ice just hasn't formed.
Not even close, right?
Not even close. And like
Yeah.
this particular winter was the least ice recorded, I think, ever. So
Yeah. I mean, everything on Georgian Bay seems to cycle, but
yeah, cycle. And then, but there's cycles and then there's patterns. And one of the patterns is that the cycles aren't reviving to the same degree that they once were. And that does have implications for things like native fish species that depend on the ice for protection for their babies and things like that.
Yeah.
But also it was just a great thrill, like just to be out there and doing it. And, growing up, it was like like a connection to my grandfather. He had us when we were kids, out in scoots and being on the ice and walking on the ice and being on the ice was part of their lifestyle. They lived on remote islands. They're known as like the full timers, right? So they're out on the Georgian Bay all year long, including winter. And, but one thing that was totally evident when I was being raised was like, yeah, these folks didn't survive their winters. They celebrated it. They thrived. And it's when the ice came in that, they got excited and were out on it. And that's also when like everybody could get to the neighbors, right? So in the summertime, it's just folks that knew how to handle a boat or handle the chop. But in the wintertime, anybody could just walk to the neighbor for a game of cards or something. So in a way too, it was just like honoring that and celebrating that piece of insight that I had from growing up that I really wanted to do it. And so part of our approach is, again, the Western Islands, a fascinating place to me because, they are so remote. There's a huge lighthouse there and families used to live there like all year long. So, and I just, both of my journeys coming in, I just imagine what it would have been like, if you could kind of, like muddy up time a little bit And as if I were able to pull off these objectives 50 years ago or 80 years ago, and just kind of stroll in on these people.
Right.
That's like one of the little chuckles I have to myself.
Yeah, nice. You mentioned scoot there, and maybe explain to people what a scoot is.
Sure. Yeah. So a scoot is like it's like a flat hulled boat that has like a big plane prop on the back of it. So it's kind of like the precursor to a hovercraft, and they were invented and manufactured by hand by the Georgian Bay Métis community and the full timers living full time on the bay. So my grandfather was, he'd made a couple in his life, and like they literally just made these things out of plywood and bed springs and whatever they could salvage, and then it became like this viable method of getting around, and then they would celebrate it every winter at the Winterama Carnival in Penetang. They come out and race them, and
So they can go
and so
on, they can just hop off the ice right onto the water, back on the ice, back on the water.
yeah, it's like an amphibious kind of a boat that can just go all over the place. And
Cool.
so yeah, so it was an amazing element of growing up, right? We'd go ice fishing and those things, and yeah, it was just freedom to get all over the place.
Yeah, cool. I know when you were doing that, the winter crossing, you had one of those spot devices, and I was following you. And at some point, I think I got up in the morning and looked at where you guys were, and it looked like you guys had turned around. What happened there?
Yeah, yeah. So day one. So I guess the winter crossing, one of the big differences compared to the summer crossing was it took us 3 days instead of just the one day or 2 days. I guess the summer crossing was really 2 days, but so we spent one night sleeping on the ice floes about 20, I don't know, 25K or maybe just a little less off the coast of Neashinigming. So we were out sleeping on our sups. We had a little tent area and stuff. And then, but in the course of the night, the ice pack broke open and we drifted in our sleep. So this is one of the rules that we had was, no traveling at night. It's a rule that eventually we also had to break to get off the flows on the last day. But and the reason that is because so a lot of the elements that we put together, strategizing or forecasting, if you will, like that type of stuff, or like walking on the hard water, we look at concentration. That's a key thing to consider. We look at thickness. Everybody is well aware that thick ice is better than thin ice. But the most important thing that we want to pay attention to when we're considering like an open water or crossing a Great Lake, in the wintertime, is what's known as ice velocity. So there's actually there's data for it, and you can watch it, and it's forecastable. And essentially, ice velocity is what it sounds like, moving ice. So as much as we think of ice as not moving, on a Great Lake, with the mass of the surface area of the lake, ice is always going to be moving and shifting. It's just moving very, very slowly. And that tends to speed up towards the end of the day after the ice pack has been absorbing that solar energy all day. Then like towards the end of the day, it all starts to move and like shift around. And so that definitely happens. And we experienced that. So on that record year of ice for the Georgian Bay, I think it was at like 92% concentration when we had left, dwindling already quickly though. So it was like you could almost essentially, once you access those flows, you could almost walk all the way to the westerns, if you had the time to do it. But in the middle of the night, it all broke open, and so there was about a 1.5 kilometers, like open water river, I guess, channel right down the heart of the bay that we had to then contend with on day 2.
Yeah.
And that's where we had to paddle. So we were able to pull it off. And those paddle strokes are some of the most memorable paddle strokes that that I'll always have. Right.
Yeah. I mean, all your photos from that trip are unreal. It looks like the Arctic, honestly.
So, and this is something too, like, I guess in my work, or something maybe that informs these objectives, or at least inspires them, is like I think of like the Arctic as a polar region, and I think of Hawaii or Polynesia as a tropical region. So, and then I think like within that area of Georgian Bay, you can experience both. I mean, I have postcards of Nottawasaga, that I've often traveled and share, and people are like, "Where is that? It looks like the tropics." It's like, yeah, that's home on Georgian Bay. And then you see those photos from the heart of the bay in the wintertime. So I consider Georgian Bay to be a bipolar region.
Hmm.
It's got like you can travel to these remote, like these totally different aesthetics by standing still long enough within an annual cycle.
Right. Yeah. That's cool. Although it's not happening so much lately.
Yeah, not so much.
Yeah. Um, cool. Oh yeah. And then you said you broke your rule of traveling at night. What happened there?
Oh yeah. So well, basically the day two, I guess, as we were approaching the Double Top Island Lighthouse, the ice terrain on that side of the bay, it gets overwhelmingly like thick and piled up from winter windstorms. And so we were literally navigating corridors of broken mass of ice, like what are known as hummocks. So like just massive like burdens of ice that you can't see over. And so it became like labyrinths, like that, like these tunnels and hallways that we'd have to like kind of like guess and pick our way. And so navigation got, really tricky. And then there's also these formations that are called polynya. So a polynya is just like an open water thermal bleed. It's just where there's always going to be an amount of like warm water current under the water that has to emerge. And so that creates these like little almost like vents, if you will, just of open water. So we were going through all this type of crazy terrain. And then it became evident that even though there wasn't any wind, just the ice pack itself en masse was starting to decompress. And so it was separating from where we were heading. And which meant that if we were to just bunker down and just sleep on spot, then for a second night and wait until morning, we would wake up the next day and have like, who knows, like even a greater expanse of open water to have to contend with. It could have been as much as 20 some odd kilometers. And so yet we were only about 2 kilometers from the lighthouse at that point.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it became the difference of, okay, do we just stick to the rules, which is way less safe than us advancing right now? And so it becomes a matter of risk mitigation and just being flexible. And so we made that determination to keep advancing. And it was challenging for sure, like as things were breaking up, but we advancing in those conditions at night. But then we got to the Western Lighthouse, and it was our saving grace.
Yeah.
But it was definitely the right move to make. And in the morning when we woke up, we walked to the top of the lighthouse and we were looking out over the terrain that we just came in, and it was essentially all open water.
Wow.
So it was definitely the right move.
Yeah. Amazing. Cool. That's such a gnarly trip, dude.
Like out of all the adventures that I've had, that was the first time I came home from a journey, and it was like, I sat down and just like, there's nothing else I could do. Like
Yeah.
it just left me with a feeling of like, I don't know how to explain it, but it gave me cause for pause. It was like, okay, what just happened?
Yeah. Amazing. Was there like, are you ever worried? Like on that trip, were you ever worried? Were you ever concerned? You never seemed to worry or be scared or anything.
Well, that's kind of funny. I think that's a misconception because
Yeah.
I'm probably one of the most fearful guys, like but it's also maybe the success of those objectives are the amount of preparation that goes into them. But no, I'm extremely respectful of the water and extremely respectful of the ice and all of its, expressions. But I think, but also like having kids and stuff like that too, I'm not in any position to go out and take risks that I don't think I can walk home from.
Yeah.
So I have to have that confidence in setting out. And in one aspect of this journey, like, the selecting a partner like Zane Davies, he was the guy to do this with. I mean, I had a lot of trust in him. He's just level-headed, calm and collected when things do go awry. And but also our safety gear, our preparations, we could talk for hours about that. Like we had basically like, doubles of everything. We had 2 dry suits, we had a whole separate set of gear. We had gear for 4 people essentially on that crossing.
Wow.
Just we were wearing our gear, and then we had a whole extra human, you know, assemble of gear in the barrel, sorry,
Yeah.
just so that we were ready for any situation.
So were you taking fins off, just taking your fins off and just dragging your board?
So initially, now what you can use, or what I use like these winter, is just, trolling along up here in Fathom 5 is one of those snap-in fins. They're way better.
Okay.
But like, yeah, back then we played with fins, but we essentially just paddled finless and just dragged them.
Right.
So some of the challenges that you experience on a journey like that is like, or an expedition of that size in those temperatures, is ice gets inside your fin box. You're never going to get a fin in there unless you boil up some water and add it to it. Things like your zippers and buckles, as soon as they get wet and then covered in ice just grows. And so, like, yeah, it becomes a challenge. So in the end, it was a lot easier just to go finless. We had fins with us though. So like we had a system in case we did need to paddle a distance of say 10 kilometers. That would have been super inefficient without a fin, but so we had the kit if we needed it. We just got away without using it.
Cool. And do you know what temperatures were like on that trip? It was
So
cold,
yeah, like it's kind of like, it's similar, say like an ice climber would understand like this method. It's like, like the mature ice happens at the end of a season, not so much in the middle. So like the most ice pack that you have is like in early March, basically, on a good winter. And then so at that same time, days are starting to get a little bit warmer. So we, in our training for the crossing, like we were out training in -27, that like really, really cold, frigid temperatures. For the actual crossing, I think we had one day of almost, it was like +3 or +5 in the daytime, and then nighttime lows of I think it was like -15. So, which was ideal. That is ideal, because then it's comfortable. It's your gear isn't falling apart, and it'd be much harder to achieve something like that of that size or that distance, in February or January.
Yeah.
Just because the fatigue on your gear and everything.
I mean, that's I don't know, like you say, we could talk about that forever. That's such a cool trip, and the photos from it are unreal. But we got to move on here. And I mean, your next big mission was with your daughter, the Three Waters adventure. When was that? What was that? How old was she at the time? All these questions.
So that was in 2019, July, basically a 1-month paddle that I shared with our middle child, Acadia. She was 9 at the time. And, I think, like, I guess in all of these paddles, or through paddling, I've learned a lot about my family history, or our family history on the Bay. It wasn't anything that we talked about growing up or anything like that. It was like literally through these experiences that kind of those insights came about. And then I started to like set out almost as a form of inquiry to learn more, because I found what's quite fascinating, like how well rooted the family is in the area. And so basically, like the Georgian Bay Métis community, they end up in the Georgian Bay Islands through this migration that happened in 1828, when these Anishinaabe and Métis families living on what was known at the time as Botagony-Minis, which is now known as Drummond Island. They were evicted after the War of 1812, when the Americans kind of took over the island, and they were granted land titles in Penetangmachine, about almost 500 kilometers across Lake Huron. And I guess in the case of our family, though, they weren't agriculturalists, they weren't farmers, they were islanders. And so within one generation, they left Penetang and went and settled on the most immediate islands in the archipelago, just outside of the mouth of 12 Mile. So, which is kind of where I spent most of my childhood summers.
Okay.
And so I've long wanted to piece that together, learning about that long paddle line, and just, I love a good paddle line. And when I saw that on a map and just envisioned doing it, initially I thought maybe I'd do it kind of like in a more of a solo, kind of like a, pack light, and blast it out, see how quick I could do it, just in a sense, just to cover the distance, because it's hard in life to carve out a month, and go for a paddle.
Yeah.
But then when Acadia was turning 9, in our house, generally when the kids hit around that age, we want to, before hitting double digits, we like to give them a big adventure. And I noticed that when I was drafting up that route line, Acadia was spending a lot of time looking over my shoulder. She was really curious about it. I was explaining the family history. And long and short of it is she wanted to come. So then,
Cool.
yeah. So, and I was working also on a board design with Aaron Pilon at Blue Wave SUP, Blue Wave Board Co. And we came up with an expedition model touring board that has a kind of a hollowed out deck, like a stowage well, and can support a lot of gear. And this is the board for extended multi-day expedition sup trips. And so it was also a great test for that board. And so we thought, yeah, well, let's load it up, take Acadia, and we basically loaded up the car. My mother came and the whole family came so that we could, experience Drummond Island, experience the region on that side, and set out and attempt to retrace the family history migration route. Now, our line was also a little bit contrived because I wanted to see the front side of Manitoulin Island, and like the Great Duck Islands and all those. There's just so much to see along the south shore of Manitoulin that
Yeah.
I think historically it's a little vague which way the migration route went. So they kind of branch out both along the North Channel, and there are some stories of some of the Métis families ending up on some of the islands along the front there. So they must have gone down the south route, but that's essentially the route that we took.
Yeah.
And at the time, Acadia was doing at school, she was doing some work in her science class on plastic pollution in the oceans and that type of thing. And so she had this kind of a question that she presented, like, she was wondering if she was to catch a fish in Georgian Bay or Lake Huron and cut it open, if she would find garbage in its belly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of kept that conversation going, and long and short of it was she decided she would like to take some sampling along the way for microplastics research. And we partnered with the Coastal Center based out of Goderich, and they were just phenomenal, helping Acadia, with taking water samples and analyzing those samples. And so we were able to do that. So along the way, we decided to make this a pilgrimage for microplastics research as well.
Wow.
And
Cool.
we took samples along the journey, and
I never really heard the results from that. Did you guys get results from that?
Well, so like after the journey, yeah, we analyzed all those samples, and there was 48 of the samples had plastics in them. Out of my apologies, I got the number wrong there. It's 42 out of 45 samples.
Wow.
So yeah, 42 samples had microplastics in them. So and at that time in 2019, there was little data on microplastics presence at depth. I think the assumption of the day was that, it's plastic, therefore it floats.
Mm-hmm.
And so with my work with our local high school here, we go up to we take the senior science group and we go up to Killarney Lakes, and we have this deep water sampler that we use for our lake studies with the canoe program. And so I thought, well, hey, let's take that thing. There's zero data on deep water presence of microplastics. Let's see what we find. So we took this deep water sampler with us, and we launched it on all of these kind of historic straits and channels along the route. And I think 4 out of those 5 deep water samples all contained microplastics. And 2 of those samples were taken at 50 feet deep. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So it was kind of like, and there's also a lot too that you learn in that research work about how easy it is to contaminate a sample. So we were being super careful, washing everything 3 times, making sure that we were clean. But then it sort of dawned on us too that if it's that easy for us to contaminate a sample based on shedding of our clothing or what have you,
mm-hmm.
It's kind of it's also, it's indicative of how big the problem really is. If we're all walking around shedding microplastics.
Yeah, there's going to be plastic everywhere. Yeah. And so, and you guys were on one paddleboard. She was sitting or sitting on the front with you the whole time.
Yeah, so she could stand, sit down, move around. We'd swap it up just to keep it interesting. Like 1 month, 500K, some of our days were 30, 40 kilometer pushes. So we had to switch things up a little bit along the way just to keep it fresh. But the thing about Acadia and I is like she can paddle, she can stand up. She's been on the nose of my board since she was born. And so like our balance is totally symmetrical. Like we just, like there's no way we're throwing each other off. Like so she's well adjusted standing on the nose of a board, but she had her own little cockpit there sitting on the barrel.
Yeah, amazing.
And she legitimately paddled it, right? Acadia, you've been on rivers with her, and she legitimately did contribute to that. I did not paddle my daughter across the Great Lake. It was a tandem effort, and I'm super proud of her. There
I,
was we
I
Yeah, we
believe
had
it.
a few. Yeah, man. Yeah,
Yeah,
you've seen what she's capable of, and she's just hardwired and driven for that kind of thing. She loves endurance, and we had, there were places along the way that were familiar to her, like the Mississauga Lighthouse, and South Bay Mouth. And so a lot of it for her was connecting these places of familiarity with then these stretches of unknown waters. And so, she's also 9 at the time. So it's totally understandable that, she felt far away and distant, but she really kept it all together. She really, really wanted this. I think she felt she knew what she was doing was big.
yeah,
And we were able to like convene with the family at 3 different spots along the way. So she was able to catch up with mom and siblings, 3 times
yeah,
in these familiar places. And I think that it kind of did 2 things for her. It always made the next day a little harder to get back on the water and say those hard goodbyes.
yeah.
But it also gave her fuel on the fire for like what she's doing. She knew it was big, and
Cool, man. Beautiful trip, dude.
that was definitely like a transformational trip. And even for myself, I think it was like kind of a it's like where everything kind of came together. And it was the first time too that I got to experience what it's like, to get into your 4th wind, like to be out there for a month, and just to be waking up every single day, and we just put our trust in the lake, and that everything would work out. We didn't prearrange campsites or anything. Our objective was to get to the heart of the wild places and go to these, we just slept on the good earth. So we just go to these remote islands and just pitch tent on the granite or the limestone as it is. And, and just trust that, things would work out. And it just was such a way that, we'd arrive at some of these campsites, like in Killarney or Killbear, or even up at Providence. And, people book these sites like back in January and February. And here we would just kind of show up, and the timing of everything, right? The synchronicity would just be like, people would grant us like the front waterfront site. It just always worked out. And the generosity that we were given from people the whole way through it just felt like we were on a real pilgrimage. And it was a little sad to see that one end, paddling into Penetang. I was definitely ready to keep going.
Yeah, yeah, I bet. Yeah, amazing. Cool. Well, that's another amazing trip that we could also talk about forever. But I know you did the picking up the bundles trip. I guess I came and shot you a couple times when you were out on that. What was that all about?
Well, so that was the picking up the bundles is a dear friend and brother of mine, Wasikam Nin, from Saugeen Ojibwe First Nation, who, on behalf of the community, was doing a ceremonial paddle journey around the Saugeen territory. And so I didn't know him prior to that journey, where we had never met. But I think there was a couple days where they were maybe just kind of storm stayed up on the tip. And I think one of the most beautiful elements of these ceremonial Gmon journeys that the community does is it's less about it has nothing to do with the individual's objective or like what they've pulled off. It's a matter of a community effort and seeing that Gmon work its way along. And so it's almost like people are in and out of the boat. And I think at that stage, Wasekom was up in close to Tobermory, and he didn't have a partner to continue. The weather was kind of like the waves were kind of big. Somebody else knew, that I guide up here and that I'm on the water a lot, and had sent me a private message to say, hey, would you go up and lend some assistance to this, or just so that this guy could use a hand. And at first I thought, yeah, sure, I can definitely go up. And so I went and I met with Wasekom, and we decided, I could definitely help him get to Tobermory, which is like 11K.
Yeah.
And so we started off with that. We got in the boat together. And right away, I just fell in love with this dude, just his laughter and his playfulness on the water and what he was doing for his community.
Mm-hmm.
In the Jimon, there is a copper vessel of water, of Nibe, which is Anishinaabe for water. And so that's water is all of the prayers of the community go into that water. And then that very sacred little copper pot is carried from one end of the territory all the way to the other. And so all of this is new to me. I've never seen this before. But I'm like wide open to learning what I can from this experience. And we pull into Tobermory after that 11K distance. And there was a whole reception there of water walkers, women from the community. And there was a water ceremony held right at the tip. And so I was participant to that. And then I was just in that moment, I just knew that I'd be back in that boat and helping in any way that I could. And we essentially continued and paddled all the way to the Nottawasaga, like some 200 kilometers later, just kind of helping, just kind of tandeming, going back and forth with other paddlers and assisting from shore where possible or when necessary, and just kind of making myself available for whatever I could do and like to do to support the cause. And through that process, I just learned so much, like, again, kind of like how these paddles as a form of inquiry. I learned a lot about my own family history on the bay. Now I'm learning about so much more, like the history of the region, the history of our first peoples, and that are presently here working so hard to keep the water clean and making sure that their prayers are heard.
Yeah.
And it was just super, like, so impactful. And I learned a lot. And I learned a lot about things that we're taught not to see, all of the place names of this region that are way older, than the names that we've placed on top. And when I see that living spirit underneath it all, it's like I want to pour water on that. I want to see that grow. I want to see it become louder, and I want to see this community succeed at the work it's trying to do, to have its prayers heard.
Cool. And so that was a canoe trip, right? Just a tandem canoe, plain old normal canoe, not a big one or anything?
No, just a red tandem canoe.
And so where did the boat go from?
So it started at Kettle Point on one side of it basically traced the territory of Hasagi Ojibwe Nation, starting at Kettle Point all the way to Nottawasaga River mouth.
Okay. So that's up around the peninsula and back down, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
And I didn't do the first half of that. I mean, it's such a humongous objective that I think it took him 1 full month as well.
Yeah.
My involvement, my participation started just west of Tobermory.
Okay. And what's the significance of the picking up the bundles?
So picking up the bundles is a form of expression. Like, bundles in Anishinaabe culture or understanding are like the lessons that you pick up in life. And like the lessons that come to you maybe inadvertently, or like you don't even know that you're looking for something, or maybe you're not even looking, but along the path there you find what you're looking for. It just pops up. So like these knowledge bundles about they just like things that come along the way. So I think in part for Wasekum, that's his way of titling or naming this process, or this whatever it is, this process of his form of inquiry, using paddling as a form of inquiry. So
cool.
you setting out and just learning as you go, learning from the people that you meet, learning from the observations that you make, both externally and then internally, what happens to you, like the transformation that happens to you when you embark on such a large objective like that.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so you were saying that you guys try to take your kids on a mission before they're 10. I know your son River must be getting close.
Yeah.
What's his trip?
I I don't know yet, man. I'm trying
Yeah.
to. We'll see. I might be taking him out to the Rocky Mountains this fall,
Yeah.
just for fun. That
Right
that
on.
won't. Yeah. No, that hasn't been fleshed out yet.
Yeah. Cool.
The other part of those journeys too is that there's two halves to it, like, and a big piece of that comes from them. So I think
Right.
as River gets closer, I think the only thing I know is that it's going to be epic. We're going to do something that's fun, and I'm sure
I
it's going to be good, whatever it is.
um yeah, do you have a next big adventure planned?
Not really. Like, not. I mean, it's like these. I think like the big adventures tend to get, I guess, because they're loud, they tend to get all of the attention. But behind every one of those is like, you know, hundreds of little missions that really kind of amalgamate into those bigger objectives. And so it's just like filling in. Like, there's so many islands in northern Georgian Bay that I've just are standing out and just screaming at me to come and tag them. And like, I want to get out to like, I've I know many of them I've explored, but then you get out to these places like Half Moon Island, and then you're just looking out at Lonely, or Papoose, and like there's so many of these little rocks that are just out there. So I think just continuing, the spirit of getting out and tagging these places, and just seeing what they're all about.
Yeah.
um so like, definitely, getting up there more, hopefully.
Cool. Yeah.
It's I'm
I,
lucky right now in life too. Like, I feel like, I've got you guys. You're always planning the annual river trip. So it's like I don't have to plan that anymore. I just come along for the ride, and
yeah.
like, so just going along with it right now. I think as far as like big objectives, there's nothing in the wings right now.
Yeah.
But
Cool.
yeah,
Cool, man. Well, thanks for joining us. I think that's about it.
right on, Colin.
Unless you have anything else you want to add.
Yeah. So like, just in relation to my work and my photography and my film work,
Yeah.
at the heart of what I do, I'm just really showing up for the Bay, I guess. Like, just to serve it and protect it in any way that I can, and trying to use film and story, like, to help amplify the voices of those who are a part of the lake and the lake story. So like, whether that's helping Indigenous relatives in their ceremonial paddles or water walks, or like using film and photography to document the harmful impacts of like pollution in the Great Lakes, and what this has on our wild animals, birds and fish species and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm taking people out, paddling to connect them to these wild spaces. And I guess I'm trying to pour water on their relationship with the lake in hopes that that grows. Because it's kind of like, so long as we interpret water as like this big resource, or this big commodity to go out and play amok on, it's like, if we don't have that relationship piece, that's just how we end up allowing it to be abused in the way that we have, right? And in the scope of like our lifetime, like, I can remember vividly like being to these same places as a kid, and they weren't polluted the way they are today. We've seen this grow within our lifetime. And I
Yeah.
think, just having that, you know I guess, just like having spent my life in these areas, yeah, I want to make sure that they're well clean and protected, and as beautiful as they were when I grew up, for my kids and their kids and your kids.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like you're hooked on Georgian Bay. Why is that?
Well, I don't know. Like, I think there's nowhere else in the world that I can explore and get and learn so much about myself, like, and my family history or the region. It's just such a fascinating place, and maybe a little bit back to like that spectrum of the area, like its seasonal character that I just love and adore so much, how it can just be so expressive from like, summertime to winter. It's just such an amazing place. And like, don't get me wrong, I love to travel. I love to go to places, like Hawaii, or recently Mexico and stuff. And like, and what I love is like going out and taking more lessons from the water, surfing in the ocean and what have you, and then taking that back home. But I think also, it's like, I love, like, when I'm down in a place like Mexico, like seeing how the Great Lakes have shaped us too. So it's like what we're able to do. I just watched my eldest daughter Talasa surf and shred, down in the ocean, and she's Great Lakes made, right? Like all her surfing and her whole progressional path has been on Georgian Bay, like Huron. So it's a huge testament to like the heart of this water. And I just think it is a beautiful place. And it's, I think I love the world. I love traveling, but this is home. And like just having that feeling like I belong here.
Right on,
And
buddy.
the Bay gives me that.
Cool. Well, that's probably a good place to end it.
Rock and roll.
Yeah. Thanks, brother.
Thanks, Colin.
I'd like to thank Scott Parent for taking the time to speak with us. Stay tuned to the pages of Mountain Life Blue Mountains for more info on what he's up to. Thanks to Shariah Rules for the voiceovers in the intro, and to Adrian Gendro for the guitar licks. And thanks to you all for listening. Don't forget to check out the print editions of Mountain Life magazine. You can get a subscription over at mountainlifemedia.ca. Until next time, 2 wheels, 1 love. Peace.